I thought I was just having a little fun at my husband's expense, but one party tore our perfect life to pieces. He walked out, leaving a silence I can't drown out, no matter how hard I try. Friends have turned their backs, and family looks at me like I'm a stranger. Now I'm left alone with this empty echo, louder than anything I've ever heard. But let's start from the beginning. My name is Lisa, 29, and let me tell you, I thought I had it all figured out with Jake, my husband. He's 31, and by all accounts, the perfect guy. You know, that steady, dependable type who's always there, always calm, always nice. But here's the thing. Perfect can get real boring, real fast. Jake never fought back, never argued. He'd just smile and nod. It got to the point where I could barely stand his sure honey attitude. I needed something to shake it up, just to feel something different, you know? So, when our neighbors invited us to a backyard party, I had an idea. Jake and I were walking into the buzzing atmosphere. String lights draped across trees, music in the background, people already a couple of drinks in and laughing too loudly. The whole place just had that vibe, like everyone was in a let's get a little wild kind of mood. I looked over at my best friend Sarah, who was sipping her drink with that mischievous look in her eye. I leaned in and whispered, "How far do you think we can go messing with Jake tonight?" She grinned, and I knew I had an accomplice. Our game was on. So, here's how it all started. Just a few harmless jokes. Nothing Jake couldn't handle. Or so I thought. I mean, this was the guy who never complained, never argued back. It was like he'd made it his life's mission to keep the peace. And honestly, I was ready to shake things up a bit. The first test was simple. I asked him to grab me a drink. No big deal, right? Jake just nodded and went off, like the perfect guy he always was. But when he came back, I scrunched my face, inspecting the glass like I was some kind of expert. I don't know, Jake. This glass looks kind of smudged. Mind getting another? He gave me this small, patient smile, said, "Sure, no problem," and went right back. Sarah caught my eye and gave me this smirk. We were just getting started. When Jake came back again, I pulled the same move, inspecting the glass like it was some major deal. Sarah chimed in, laughing. "I don't know, Lisa. Maybe Jake's too soft to tell you no." I saw a flicker of something in Jake's eyes, but he just shook his head with that same calm smile. "I'm good," he said. But I knew he wasn't. A few more people had gathered around, chuckling every time I threw another innocent comment his way. Someone in the crowd murmured, "Man, Jake's got the patience of a saint." And of course, I jumped on that. "Yeah, he's way too nice. I mean, if he ever actually got mad, I'd probably pass out from the shock," I joked, which got another laugh from the group. Jake's smile was fading now, but he didn't say a word. And that just made it more tempting to push further. At some point, I caught this little glimmer of irritation in his expression, like he was this close to saying something. But he swallowed it down, exactly like he always did. And honestly, that only made it more entertaining. The longer he stayed quiet, the more I piled on. I mean, he could have stopped at any time, right? He just had to speak up. A couple of people around us shot us side glances, like maybe they were feeling bad for him or thought we were taking it a bit too far. But I just laughed it off. "Guys, relax, we're just having fun," I said, not really caring who looked uncomfortable. Honestly, I don't even remember who had the bright idea to start a drinking game, but once it kicked off, things escalated. Fast. And of course, we pulled Jake right into it. He wasn't exactly thrilled, but hey, he'd go along with whatever, right? That was the whole point. The game started out innocent enough. Take a sip if you have brown hair kind of stuff. But soon, it turned into a full-on challenge fest, with Jake as the target. Sarah and I kept daring him to do the most ridiculous things, and every time he hesitated, we'd just nudge him, saying stuff like, "Come on, Jake, don't be boring," or, "What's wrong, scared of a little fun?" Jake tried to keep up, but his smiles? They were fading fast. I could see this tension in his face, like he was holding something back. That only made me push harder, though. At this point, it wasn't about the game. It was about seeing just how much he'd take without snapping. And yeah, maybe a few of our friends were getting uncomfortable, but no one said a word. I mean, who was going to break the vibe and ruin the fun? Then, right when I thought I couldn't get more laughs, Jake went to grab another round of drinks and ended up tripping on the edge of the rug. Wine flew everywhere, and of course, I laughed louder than anyone else. "Wow, Jake, really smooth," I said, grinning as he scrambled to clean up. His face went pale, and for a second, he looked like he might actually say something. But instead, he just stayed quiet, eyes on the floor as he wiped up the mess. A few people looked away, clearly feeling secondhand embarrassment for him. But here's the thing. I couldn't stop. Seeing him on edge like that, watching his patience crack bit by bit, it was addictive. It felt like I was finally getting a reaction, something real from him. I was hooked on it, even if a part of me knew we were crossing a line. At this point, I could tell Jake was barely holding it together. He'd put up with a lot that night, but something had shifted. His usual calm, that steady patience, it was unraveling right in front of me. He leaned in, trying to pull me aside, maybe to tell me to dial it back. But I wasn't having it. I jerked my arm away and laughed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Seriously, Jake? You can't handle a little harmless teasing?" That did it. His eyes darkened, and for the first time ever, I thought he might actually snap. His face was tight, like he was barely holding back words he'd kept bottled up forever. But he didn't say a thing. Instead, he gave me this cold, distant look that sent a chill down my spine, like he was a stranger, and then he just turned away. After that, he mostly stayed silent, watching from the sidelines as I carried on with the jokes and laughter, acting like nothing was wrong. But it was weird. There was this unspoken tension building between us, and I could feel it getting stronger with every second. Even with all the noise and energy of the party, it was like we were in our own bubble, and in that bubble, something had shifted. People kept laughing, music kept playing, but between Jake and me, everything felt off. I shrugged it off, assuming he'd cool down by the time we got home like he always did. As the night dragged on, someone got the idea to dare Jake to dance in front of everyone. Honestly, I thought he'd finally put his foot down and refuse, maybe even storm off. But instead, he stood up, nodded, and stepped into the middle of the crowd, eyes locked on me like he was daring me right back. What followed was rough. Jake stumbled his way through this awkward, clumsy dance, barely keeping in time with the music. People around us laughed, some trying to stifle their giggles, others not bothering at all. But Jake? He kept his gaze fixed on me, like I was the only one in the room. His look wasn't angry or hurt, it was cold, distant, like he was seeing through me. And just for a second, that look got to me. I felt this pang of guilt I didn't want to acknowledge. But instead of stopping, I laughed right along with everyone else. I mean, why should I feel bad? He could just walk away if he couldn't handle a joke, right? When he finally finished, he straightened up, breathing hard, face pale. Then he looked at me one last time, and there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite read, like I'd finally crossed a line I didn't even know was there. Without a word, he turned, walked straight to the drink table, grabbed his jacket, and started to leave. That was my cue to follow. I jogged after him, half expecting him to turn around and explode, to let out all the anger he'd been holding back. But instead, he paused, looked over his shoulder with this icy calm, and said, "Enjoy the party, Lisa. I'm done." Then he turned and walked out, leaving me standing there surrounded by the people who'd just laughed with me, suddenly feeling more alone than ever. I tried to brush it all off, thinking Jake would cool down on the drive back. You know, a few minutes of silent treatment, then maybe a sigh, and back to normal. But nope. The entire ride was this heavy, suffocating silence. Not a single word. I was practically squirming in my seat, the tension was so thick. I tried breaking the ice with a little joke. "Come on, Jake, it was just a party," I said, trying to keep it light. Nothing. He didn't even look at me. Just kept his eyes glued to the road, jaw clenched so tight I thought he might crack a tooth. That silence? It was worse than any argument we'd ever had. Part of me wanted to shake him, yell at him for being so dramatic. But there was something in his expression that stopped me cold. Something I'd never seen before. a kind of finality, like he was done. When we finally got home, he didn't say a word. He got out of the car, walked straight into the house, and headed to the bedroom. I followed him, half expecting him to turn around and finally start talking. But as soon as I stepped into the room, he turned to face me, and there was this look in his eyes, cold, distant. For the first time in our whole marriage, it felt like he didn't care about anything I had to say. Like my words wouldn't make a difference, no matter what they were. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just a silent treatment. This was something much bigger. When I walked into the bedroom, Jake was sitting on the edge of the bed, his hands clasped, staring down at the floor. He looked exhausted, like he'd been carrying around a weight I hadn't even noticed. For the first time, I saw just how deeply I'd hurt him, and it hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. He finally looked up, eyes shadowed with something I couldn't shake. "Is this all I am to you, Lisa?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "A joke?" I tried to brush it off, laugh even, but before I could get a word out, he cut me off, his eyes fierce and unwavering. "You made me look like a fool tonight, and maybe it's on me for letting it go on this long, but I can't do this anymore." His voice was steady, calm even, but there was a finality in it that I'd never heard before. My chest tightened with panic, but my pride wouldn't let me back down. I rolled my eyes, shrugging it off. "Jake, come on, you're overreacting. It was just a party, a little fun." He shook his head slowly, standing up and facing me. "No, Lisa," he said, his tone cold and firm. "We're done." Those words hung in the air, chilling, like he'd just dropped a weight I couldn't pick up. Before I could even process it, he started packing his things, every quiet movement feeling like a goodbye. I tried to argue, tried to say something, anything to pull him back. But he just kept packing in silence, one careful, deliberate action after another, each one another nail in the coffin of what we had. And there was nothing I could say to stop him. Jake walked out that night, and at first I didn't think much of it. I figured he'd come back after cooling off, maybe ready to give me the cold shoulder for a couple of days. But days turned into weeks, and he was gone. No calls, no texts, just silence. At first, I tried to laugh it off. "Jake'll come around," I told myself. But then I started noticing that my phone was way too quiet. Friends, family, people just stopped reaching out. It was like I'd hit some invisible wall, like everyone knew something I didn't. Eventually, it got back to me. Word had spread about my big joke at the party. And the reaction? Let's just say people weren't exactly rushing to defend me. One by one, people I thought were close started taking his side. They told me they were shocked, that they'd never expected me to be so, well, cruel. Some of them didn't even try to hide their judgment. It stung, but honestly. The worst part was the quiet. Jake left this silence that just echoed. Every single night, I'd find myself replaying that party, hearing my own laugh, the jokes I thought were so harmless, and Jake's final words echoing louder than any of it. All that laughter, that fun I'd thought we were having, it felt so empty now, like a joke that had turned on me. And there I was, left alone with the silence he'd left behind, louder somehow than anything I'd ever heard.